Hey friends, with you Vishal. Are you watching RD Group of Management Training Academy? Today we will talk about the competition ICAO's Annexure 9 facilitation, recommended practice 6.6, states as follows: ICAO 2005, it is recommended that aircraft operators, in agreement with, and subject to, reasonable limitations which may be imposed by the airport operators, be offered the choice of providing their own services for ground handling operations, or the option of having such operations performed entirely, or in part, by an organization controlled by another aircraft operator authorized by the airport operator, or by the airport operator, or by a servicing agent approved by the airport operator. ICAO makes it clear that several choices should be given to aircraft operators with respect to ground handling arrangements, including providing their own services. In cases where airports provide such services or derive concessional revenue from their provision, appropriate guidance is contained in ICAO's Policy on Charges for Airports and Air Navigation Services (DOC) 9082, with supplementary guidance given in Airport Economics Manual (DOC) 9532. These are some of the measures taken by ICAO to ensure competition and non-discriminatory practices in ground handling services. Mishra, 2011. Rule 92 of Aircraft Rules, 1937 is defined as follows: Manmohan, 2011, the licensee shall, while providing ground handling service by itself, ensure a competitive environment by allowing the airline operator at the airport to engage, without any restriction, any of the ground handling service providers who are permitted by the central government to provide such services, provided that such ground handling service provider shall be subject to the security clearance of the central government. From these recommended practices and rules, it is clear that competition must be ensured for ground handling activities. However, the restriction of airline operators, excluding the national airline, Air India, against self-handling at certain airports, and restricting ground handling to the airport operator and/or other permitted ground handling companies alone, is against the recommended practices provided by ICAO. It has been seen that India's new ground handling policy closely follows the model of the European directive issued in 1996. However, on comparison, it is understood that some of the critical conditions mentioned in this directive are completely avoided by the new regulation in India, which is as follows: Howland, 1996, whereas for certain categories of ground handling services, access to the market and self-handling may come up against safety, security, capacity and available space constraints, whereas it is therefore necessary to be able to limit the number of authorized suppliers of such categories of ground handling services, whereas it should also be possible to limit self-handling, whereas in that case, the criteria for limitation must be relevant, objective, transparent and non-discriminatory, whereas if the number of suppliers of ground handling service is limited, effective competition will require that at least one of the suppliers should ultimately be independent of both the managing body of the airport and the dominant carrier. At airports operated by AAI, the third ground handling service provider, besides the airport operator and the subsidiary company of the national carrier, is selected by the AAI on tender. This company selected by AAI is to be security cleared by the central government and have certain specific performance standards met. It is also required to pay a certain amount of royalty to the AAI on its revenue. AAI, 2007. In such cases, it has been seen that even though India's ground handling policy closely follows the European model, it has clearly violated one of the important norms to ensure competition, especially at Chennai and Kolkata airports owned by AAI. Many reputable foreign airlines have expressed concerns over this essential service required by them while operating in India. Although the new regulation specifies 3 service providers, AAI has required the foreign airlines to contract with either the AISATS, National Airline and its joint venture, or the consortium of Bhadra International India Limited and Novia International Consulting APS Denmark. However, on enquiry of whether AAI would provide ground handling service, it has been said that the policy decision has not yet been taken. Polis, 2011. It should also be noted that it has been 3 years since the new regulation was framed. The European ground handling model is also not a perfect one in achieving adequate competition. One of the impacts of the European Ground Handling Directive is that competition improved post-liberalization. But this healthy competition existed for only about 7 to 8 years since the issue of the directive. During the past 5 to 6 years, excess competition has resulted in price wars between the service providers. Ground handling companies are expected to have creative ideas to gain business. In future, there might be a situation where every bit of service will be invoiced. Rude, 2011. It might be for these reasons that the European Council has now decided to review the existing directive. The public consultation process was closed during 2010, CAA, 2011.